Thank you very much. That was very nice. I'm going to show you the book. We're very, very pleased with it. They put a beautiful cover on it, and it's the tangle of strings with the little origami birds hanging down there. And there's a whole reason for that. There's a whole chapter on that in the book. But I'm going to start out with just some stories because that's what I am. I'm basically a storyteller, and Ellen is too. And the first story I'm going to tell is about libraries because that's where we are right now. And so in downtown Kalamazoo, the Kalamazoo Public Library is not just a library. It's not just a place to get books. It's a place where people who have no place else to go sometimes just go just to have a friendly face, just to have a comfortable chair, just to use the bathroom, just to get out of the cold, just to get out of the heat. And we all know that this library is this kind of gathering place for the people of downtown. Well, all those years I worked at St. Vincent de Paul, we are just like 5 blocks from the library. And all the people that come there are kind of coming to our little thrift store for some of those same reasons. They just want somebody to talk to. They don't really want to buy anything. They're just hanging out and trying to get through life one day at a time. And one day I was in the thrift store, and there were a couple of ladies who were staying at the Mission. And I don't know if you know this, but the Mission you have to get out during the day in good weather, and you can come back in the evening. So they were just hanging out in downtown Kalamazoo, and they're in our thrift store and just kind of looking around, and they don't have any money to buy anything, and they're just spending time. And the one lady says to her friend, she says, "We've got to go to the library. I need to use the bathroom." And her friend said, "Oh, they'll let you use it here. Just ask." And the lady goes, "They will? What's it like?" And I realized that if you're wandering around downtown all day and you're not a paying customer, all the signs in the restaurants say for customer use only, and in the stores it's for customer use only, right? And so there aren't that many places to go to the bathroom. And what this lady was saying to me was, if they'll let me use the bathroom, how bad is it, right? And I thought, oh, how sad, but I was kind of interested because I clean the bathroom. I didn't let on that I worked there, and I just kept listening to him. And the one lady says, "Oh, don't worry, it's nice and clean. Go ahead and ask." And isn't that a human dignity thing? That you and I can go and buy a Coke somewhere at McDonald's and use their bathroom, right? We can use the bathroom anytime we want to just because we can afford to buy a Coke, right? And yet the people that are living downtown and really need a place to go to the bathroom can't. And so that was one of my eye-opening moments working at St. Vincent de Paul, is how what we do just every day that we don't think about sometimes really affects people who don't have resources. And so that's my beginning story, and it kind of connects with the library. Ellen grew up working at the St. Vincent de Paul thrift store too, because I started working there when she was about 10 years old, and she would have to come on her days off school or in summer vacation, and she and her sister were often just there counting puzzle pieces or going through the prom dresses and trying them on and just having a good time at the thrift store. She kind of grew up there, and we were trying to teach our kids to volunteer. We wanted them to know that time you give away is precious. It's a wonderful thing to give your time away. And so Dean and I, my husband and I, would often do this volunteer work and would include our kids and their friends. One of my other daughter's friends is here, and you spent some time at the thrift store too, didn't you? Yeah, so it was just one of our parenting techniques is to teach them to volunteer. Well, when Ellen grew up and she went to school at Western and graduated, it was 2008, and the economy just kind of face planted. Everybody remembers that, and especially if you live in Michigan, there were no interviews. Not only no jobs, there were no interviews. She didn't have any chance at finding work. And so she had a minor in Japanese, And so she started looking overseas. And I realized, oh, our children are emigrating. They're becoming, oh, look, one of the children. This is my daughter, Martha. They're becoming what my great-great-grandmother was. They're going overseas to find work, right? To find a new life. And it was just kind of heart-wrenching to me that this was happening. And she did. She found a job in Japan, and she was 23, and she packed her bags and moved to Japan. And it was really hard. And I didn't know how to stay connected to her. And so, is she making faces? And so, we set up Skype. And she says, don't worry, Mom, we can Skype, right? And so this is what we did, and we did a lot of Skyping. We spent Christmas morning over Skype. I mean, we did a lot of things. She came to some of her cousins' weddings over Skype. So this was how our family kept in contact. And when she was there for 5 years altogether, 1 year as a student, then 4 years actually working there. And when she was thinking of coming home, I said, Ellen, would you like to write a book with me? I think there's a lot of families going through this. I think a lot of families could benefit from how we kept in contact, how we kind of had to figure out how to communicate all over again. And she said, sure. Are you hearing?
I can only assume that she's making jokes about me because I can't really hear what she's saying.
Okay,
but
I'm going to try harder here. So one day while she was in Japan, she'd been there about a year. My husband, now, we originally were going to call this book, I'll Call You in My Morning, because I would say to her, I'll call you in the morning, and she'd say, your morning or my morning? Because Japan is exactly 13 hours different than we are. So her morning was my night, and my night was her morning. So it was one morning at 5 in the morning, and our telephone rings, and I reached over and picked it up, and I said, hello? And she said, hi, Mom, it's Ellen. Don't worry, I'm fine. And I said, why are you fine? Why are you calling me at 5:15? She said, Mom, there was an earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a tsunami. And I said, oh, no, are a lot of people hurt? She goes, yeah, Mom, it's bad. And then she said, and after the tsunami, there's a nuclear disaster. And I'm like, oh my gosh. You know, triple disasters where my daughter is, right? And I said, did it hit your town? She goes, well, they're on the one small part of the coast that the tsunami didn't hit. They're on the opposite side of the island, everything around them, but the whole country was affected. And so that was an experience of now she's really a grown-up, right? She's really on her own. There's nothing I can do for her. She's got to make these decisions about whether to stay, whether to go. And so this time I'm going to turn it over to Ellen. Now, did you just hear me tell the story about waking us up at 5 in the morning?
I definitely heard the 5 a.m. thing. And
Okay.
I also heard about how you were way worried about me moving to Japan and triple disasters. So I know where we are in the story.
All right. Why did you take over from there and keep the theme going about how I taught you to be a volunteer?
Right. So I think what is uniquely illustrated by this Skype session is that when you are very far away from each other, you have to be even more careful about the way you communicate because you don't always catch every word. So you really start to condense your conversations down to what's most important. And so in a way, for me, in becoming an adult while I was overseas, that really redefined my relationship with my mom, because then we just didn't have time or an internet connection that was strong enough to bicker or to really get on each other's nerves about the little things. We really just had to say, hey, Mom, I am fine. There was a triple disaster. A lot of people are dead, but the most important thing is I'm good, I'm fine. And that's why I chose to start the phone conversation that way. And it just kind of came down to her trusting me and me trusting what she and my dad had taught me. So to go back to the earlier point about me growing up volunteering in a St. Vincent's and trying on all the 80s prom dresses and counting puzzle pieces, I had been raised in a volunteering family. And even in small ways, when I had been in Japan for the first part of my stay, I had tried to find ways to interact with the community by volunteering, whether that would be cleaning the school grounds or helping the kids during sports practices. But when the tsunami and the earthquake and the nuclear disaster happened, for the first time in my life, I felt very clearly where I could be of use. And I wanted to go to the tsunami zone. So I didn't rush into it. I didn't go while the ruins were still smoking. And I waited until my summer vacation. So that would have been 3 or 4 months after. And then with 2 of my friends, we put together a volunteer group to go up to one of the small coastal towns that had been basically wiped out. And when our preparations were all done and we had the car we were going to drive and we had the steel reinforced work boots and we had the calorie packs and the granola bars and the sleeping bags, I was sitting there with my knapsack and I realized I don't have any practical knowledge of how to actually help in a tsunami zone. I am not a welder. I know only very basic first aid. I cannot operate any heavy machinery. Oh no, what am I doing? And I was just thinking, I wish someone had written a book about how to volunteer. Like, where do I find this stuff? And then I remembered my mom had written 2 books on volunteering. So I turned right back to my mom's advice and read those books. And what really stuck out to me, and what she had taught me time and again as a child, was that listening is very important for any experience, for any relationship. So I went up to Miyagi Prefecture, to Minami-san Nikucho, with the power of listening and a sincere hope in my heart that I would not make things worse. So for a slight bit of background on Minami-san Nikucho, it was a little fishing community, not very large, but not tiny either. Around the same size as Portage, I guess I would say. And in 20 minutes after the disaster, they lost 8,000 residents, which is a stunning body count. And the town was really struggling to rebuild because this is a fishing village. So when you have something like an earthquake and a tsunami and a nuclear disaster, not only does that take away your town, it also takes away your boats. It takes away all of the sea life and the vegetation. So they couldn't even, on any scale, start to rebuild their economy, much less their houses. So we volunteered with a grassroots organization that was mainly concerned with rehabilitating farmland. Because another thing about a tsunami wave is even after the wave and the water is gone, it leaves behind everything that it destroyed. So you have boats, and you have pieces of highway, and you have crumbled up masonry and chemicals and just dirt, sludge in the buildings. And so we were just cleaning lands, hoping to get it clear so they could start growing vegetables. And these were long days, and I felt very out of my element most of the time. The first day I got there, they took a look at me and handed me a chainsaw and said, "Okay, we have to cut down those trees." And I was thinking, people don't even usually give me like large knives with any sort of confidence, and you just gave me a power tool, so we'll see how this will go. But we worked sun up to sundown, and at the end of the day, you would just be covered with hurt and unidentified streaks of things. And so the saving grace was that one of the first things that the townspeople had repaired was their public baths. So these are outdoor hot springs. It's hot mineral water that is there naturally. And that was one of the first things they fixed because no one had showers, no one had baths, but as long as they fixed the facility around these springs, everyone could get in and get clean. So as volunteers, we were allowed to use them. And this particular day was my birthday. I am a summer-born child, and so I had taken the time off to go volunteering in a day that encompassed my birthday. And so we all agreed that after we all managed to look like humans again, we would meet at one of the emergency restaurant bars they had set up and have a drink afterwards. So I went into the women's side of the public bath, and all the guys I was with went into the guys' side, so I was all alone. So in Japan, what you first do is clean yourself. You shower and you soap up and then you rinse, and then once you're completely clean, you go into the hot baths. So I cleaned myself off and then I went into the hot baths, which in this facility were built into the side of a cliff that overlooks the bay. So it's nighttime and I'm alone in these hot springs on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and the moon is shining onto the water. And it's very dark. There aren't any other buildings except way off in the distance where the temporary housing shelters are. And my first thought was just, it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. And then I felt very bad because less than 3 months before, thousands of people had died in this water below me. But it was this strange clash of feelings. So I stood there trying to figure it out. And as I did, I happened to look down below me where the ocean waves were washing up against the cliffs. And I noticed that the sea was full of flowers. And these weren't wildflowers. These were bouquets, gorgeous arrangements of flowers. And it wasn't just one or two. These were many that stretched as far as the eye could see. And I'm thinking, well, are these for me? You know, it's my birthday. This is a roundabout way of getting some birthday flowers. And then I realized my birthday is August 15th, which in Japan is the Day of the Dead. So on a normal Day of the Dead, Japanese people would go to the family graves, similar to our Memorial Day, and you clean them. You light candles, you wait for the souls of your ancestors to come back for a visit, you offer flowers and offerings. And what was happening was there were still 3,000 people who hadn't been recovered. Not only that, all the graveyards had been swept away. And so all of these people, with all of this love in their hearts and wanting to remember, had no place to do so. And so they'd taken their flowers and their love and they'd just gone and thrown it into the sea. And that's what I was seeing washing up below me. So it was quite a moment. And I finished my bath, and as we had planned, we met up at the bar to have a beer. And we ordered a round, and it was fine. It was slightly subdued, but definitely not what I had anticipated from a birthday celebration. And I finished my beer, and just as I was about to order another, the waiter appeared at my elbow with a beer on a tray, and he said, "This is for you, compliments of the man at the bar." And I looked over at the bar, and there was a man there. I'd never seen him before, middle-aged, local, and my volunteer group leader said, "Oh, I know him. He's one of the local fishermen, but his boat was destroyed, so now he works here at the hotel, bringing services to the media and to the volunteers who come through. And I said, well, shouldn't I be buying him a drink? He shouldn't be buying me one. I'm here to volunteer and to help and listen to him, and this doesn't seem right. And my group leader said, oh, he bought that for you because he's happy you decided to celebrate your birthday here with them. And they need something to celebrate. Let him buy that beer for you. And so I did. And that's when I started to learn about volunteering and listening. So I'll hand this back to my mom. I don't know which side she's standing on, but
I'm right here.
okay.
So when you teach your kids to go and volunteer at a thrift store, you don't expect them to take it that seriously. You know, I didn't know what to say when she said, I'm going to go up to the tsunami zone. I mean, the nuclear plant was still steaming. It's still steaming today. And I was like, really, who are you going with? And she said, I thought you'd be proud of me. And I said, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. But who are you going with? You know, this is what I learned about volunteering, too, is you volunteer, you model it, you teach your kids, and they take it to a different level. And that's the story of Love Will Steer Me True. It's how I thought I was teaching her. I wasn't sure if she had listened. I was worried that she didn't know everything I'd taught her, and I tried teaching her again. And she went to Japan, and I found out she had learned more than I had taught her, that she had actually taken it higher. So that's what this book is about. How are we doing? There's funny stories, too. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I would like Ellen to tell the story about when you were teaching English to the ladies in the adult group, and
Sure.
They had a grammar question about will and shall.
Yes. So I was an English teacher, and my only qualification was that I had spoken English for 23 years, but that was good enough for them. So I mainly taught children, but I had a nighttime adult education class, which was mostly the mothers of my full-time students. And this was taught once a week from 6 to 8 o'clock at night on Thursdays. And I had already worked a full day before that, so I cannot say that my lesson plans for my adult education class were always the strongest. In fact, they usually consisted of me showing up and saying, let's talk about what happened this week, and then just hoping a grammar mistake would show up. Luckily, that usually worked okay, but I had really high-level students, so they would often really catch me off guard with their questions. On this particular evening, we had been discussing what everyone was planning to do for the weekend, and one of my very high-level students asked me, Ellen Sensei, what is the difference between will and shall? Something you will do and something you shall do. And I said, well, will is an intention. It's something that you plan to do in the future, that you're moving towards. And shall is more of a directive, something you must or have to do. And you often see it more in written form, often in rules. And they said, well, can you give me an example? And they're all scratching down on their pieces of paper and notebooks. And I said, well, and I'm searching my brain. I said, the 10 Commandments. Shall is in the 10 Commandments, like thou shalt not kill. And they said, the 10 Commandments? What are those? And I said, oh, well, they're the rules in the Bible that we're told to follow so we can get into heaven. And one of my students said, the Bible, that's that book that tells Christians they can't eat octopus. And they all said, really? common dish in Japan, so that would be like seeing the Japanese read a book that tell Americans they can't eat chicken nuggets. And so they were saying, you can't eat octopus, but Ellen, we've seen you eat octopus. Are you going to hell? And I said, well, okay. So I don't even remember what book the octopus thing was, but that was a real Old Testament. Like, that was kind of angrier God. We don't hold true to all of that. I think I'll be okay. And they said, well, hang on, so why are these 10 rules something you follow, and yet you're all right with eating octopus? And I said, well, okay, let's write these down, because the 10 commandments are pretty easy to set out, and you'll see why these are ones that we follow. And so we started writing them on the board, and they're all copying them down. And I couldn't remember the last one. I was like, oh no. I had to look it up, and it was honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And I said, oh boy, better not tell my mom. We'll keep that one a secret. But we got them all up on the board, and there's a lot of them. They're pretty self-explanatory, like thou shalt not kill. They really agreed with thou shalt honor thy father and mother. They thought that was a solid rule. But there's some difficult language. And so they said, well, Ellen Sensei, what does that one mean? Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord in vain. I said, okay. So names have power, and respect is very important. Now, in a Japanese mindset, this is absolutely understandable. You always should show respect. And so they all agreed, and I said, so in the same way, we shouldn't just throw God's name around. Like, you should only use it if you're actually talking to him or about him. So if you say something like, oh my God, just as an exclamation, that's bad. You shouldn't do that. Now, in Japanese English, oh my God is one of those go-to phrases for just about everything. It's like, I caramba or something, where you're just like, I know something in English, I'm going to throw this out there. And so they were all quite shocked that this was not something you're actually supposed to be saying. And one of the ladies raised her hand and she said, but Ellen Sensei, Tom Cruise often says, oh my God, in his movies, is he going to go to hell? And I said, well, to avoid a discussion of Tom Cruise's soul, I think he's going to be fine as long as he's sorry for it. We'll get back to that. And they said, okay. So then another woman raised her hand and she says, what does that word mean? I said, oh, adultery. That's a harder word. That means that you shouldn't have sexual relations with anyone outside of the person you're married to. You know, that's your partner. You don't want to be messing around with anyone outside of that commitment. And they said, well, what if you just kiss them? I was like, well, kissing, I mean, I think you probably shouldn't be doing that with someone if you're married to someone else, but try to stay away from that. And so another mother said, well, what if you just think about it? And I said, well, if you're thinking about it, you're probably breaking this don't covet your neighbor's wife rule. So probably shouldn't, that's not great. And they said, Ellen, that's impossible. Everybody thinks about it. And I was like, well, I mean, that's true. And they said, well, wait a second. So how many of these commandments have you broken? And I hadn't blushed in a really long time, so it was good to know that my cheeks were still capable of achieving that dark red color. But I said, I've broken enough, but I'm sorry for them, and I go to confession, and so God will forgive me. And they said, well, what's this confession thing? I said, well, if you go and pray to God and you tell him that you're very sorry, and that you're going to do better, he'll forgive you. And he'll forgive you as many times as you need it, as long as you're really sorry and you're really trying. And we're like, how does he really know that you're trying your best? Like, you could just say you are. And I said, well, because God can see my heart. He knows what's in my heart. He knows what I'm thinking. So he can judge the veracity of whether I'm trying or not. And they were just horrified. They said, Ellen, your God can see your heart? That's embarrassing. Are you okay with that? And so I called a coffee break. I was like, we're done. I can teach you no more. So.
When Ellen told me this story, I thought, I have never heard the Ten Commandments explained so beautifully. Right? And it's because we wouldn't ask those questions, would we? And then when she said that, when she said they were so horrified that our God could see our heart, and I was like, oh, I thought everybody's God could see their heart. I mean, it never occurred to me that there would be a culture that didn't think that way. And I thought, oh, this is so eye-opening to me. Such a lot I was learning from her because what she was learning and what she was sharing with me. And so that's what this book is. I said to her, let's write it, but I just want you to tell the stories about what you learned, and then I'll tell the stories about what I learned about what you learned. And so she's written about 2/3 of the chapters, and I wrote about 1/3 of them, and they're mostly just reactions to hers, because that's what happens when your kids grow up. All of a sudden, they're living these huge, big lives, and I'm just watching, and I'm just saying, this is fun. Just finding out what they're doing with their one big, beautiful life, and I'm just watching it and part of the audience and part of the fun of catching on. So now I'm going to open it up to questions. You can ask questions about the thrift store books, or you can ask questions about the Japanese book, whatever you want, and you can direct them to me or to Ellen, and I'll probably have to repeat them to Ellen so she can hear them. So if anybody wants to ask a question, I should have planted somebody. Martha, Martha.
Our plant in the audience. Yes.
This is Martha, and she is Ellen's sister. And one story I want to tell you about Martha is Ellen came home on August 1st of 2013, and Martha left on August 12th to go to Korea. But luckily she didn't stay for 4 years. But I had one, I just switched them out. I had one come home and the other one left. And we had 2 weeks together before she left.
I think that conversation is in the book, but she said, only one of you can be out of the country at a time.
Does anybody else here have like children or grandchildren who are overseas right now? Or who went overseas? You do?
My oldest son is in Guam with half of our grandchildren. So
Oh my goodness.
we do FaceTime on our iPhones.
How long have they been there?
Over a year and a half. And the thing is, they're 14 hours ahead.
Yeah.
So, of course, when the kids get on and want to show us their room, and,
Yeah.
it's sort of, it's exhausting.
Ellen, she said 3 of her grandchildren are in Guam.
I approve.
Yeah. Anybody else have somebody that they know that's teaching English overseas or just living over there? There's usually several in a crowd when I'm talking. It's amazing how much of this generation is over there. Ellen, do you have any statistics on how many of the college students in America are studying abroad?
Off the top of my head, I wouldn't want to throw out a percentage, but I can say with certainty that it is more women than men. It's something like 60-40. You're seeing a lot more girls going abroad than boys in our generation and in the current college students, which is basically the first time in history that's ever happened. So that is very interesting to me.
That's interesting to me, too. Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's no questions, I think I'm just going to call a close to this, and I'm going to be back there with the books. If you'd be willing to buy a book, you can. If not, the library carries them, and you can always borrow them. Um, and I'm really, really pleased to be here tonight, and thank you for all of you for showing up. This was wonderful. Well, thank you very much.